Grunts in the Dark. Hello, everyone. I'm glad you're here. Please like and subscribe so I can tell more interesting stories. Now let's get started. It's hard to describe the first sound that changed everything. It wasn't a word, not in the way we think of one today. It was more like a grunt, sharp, low in the throat. Kind of like the sound your uncle makes when he drops the remote and pretends he didn't mean to. But back then, that grunt meant something. Danger, food, come here, or maybe just I exist. I remember standing by the edge of the clearing watching a cousin of mine, I'll call him Rockface, drop a stone on his foot and let out this deep, throaty sound. Another nearby turned his head instantly. That sound worked like magic. Or maybe something even older than magic. Historians still debate whether vocal communication or gestural cues came first in human evolution. I say, does it matter if it worked? Because it did, and we used it, often. Most of our communication then was instinctual. Crying, laughing, growling, it was built into the meat of us. But one day, the grunts began to change. They stretched, they split. One grunt became two. A growl followed by a huff could mean leave me alone. A clicking noise paired with a whistle could mean danger near water. We weren't just reacting anymore. We were trying to describe. And that was the beginning. I once tried to mimic the call of a bird we hunted often. It was a dumb idea. The bird wasn't impressed, but the others laughed. And from then on, every time they wanted to find that bird, they'd make my awkward version of the sound. So, congratulations to me. My first word was probably a terrible bird impersonation. And somehow, it stuck. That's how it went. Trial, error, laughter, repetition. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't Shakespeare. But it got the job done. There were misunderstandings, of course. Once I accidentally warned the whole group that a predator was near when I was just trying to burp. Not my proudest moment. But soon, we were grunting in patterns, using sounds to shape reactions. Someone would grunt, and another would grunt back. A back and forth would begin. Like tennis, but with more confusion and less athleticism. Bizarre fact. Some modern primates have distinct calls for different predators, one for eagles, one for leopards, and so on. Our ancestors may have had their own version of that long before language as we know it. The night was where it got interesting. When we sat around the fire, if you could call it sitting more like a mix of squatting and leaning, like your back's trying to file a complaint, we started humming. Not singing. Not yet. Just little sounds, low vibrations in the throat. Sometimes they synced up. Sometimes they didn't. But that didn't stop us. We hummed when someone returned from a hunt. We hummed when a baby wouldn't sleep. We hummed when we were cold and couldn't find wood. It was comforting, almost sacred, and sometimes a grunt would float above the hum. A name, a place, a memory. We didn't know what it was yet, but it felt right. We began to recognize sounds tied to moments. The sound for fire wasn't the fire itself, but somehow, once you said it, or grunted it just right, people knew what you meant. It gave us something else, a future, because now we could plan. We could grunt about tomorrow. We could tell someone not to go left, because yesterday we went left, and there were bees. Angry, vengeful bees. You don't forget bees. One night, a child repeated the same 3 sounds in rhythm pointing at the sky. We all copied him, unsure what it meant. But every night after, someone would do the same until it became a ritual. A way of saying, another night, another fire. Did we invent a word? Maybe. Did we invent meaning? Absolutely. Historians still debate whether the spark of language was biological, some mutation in our brains, or cultural, shaped by our growing need to connect. I like to think it was both. The need and the spark met halfway, shook hands, and said, let's try something weird. There's a certain poetry in that. The dark was vast back then. Stars looked closer than trees. And we were so small, so new. But in the middle of that overwhelming silence, we began to answer the night, not with fear, not with hiding, but with sound. Unrefined, unapologetic, ours. And maybe that was the first real conversation. Not about what we knew, but what we hoped someone else would understand. Fire and the first word. Let me tell you, fire changed everything. It wasn't just a source of heat or light. No. Fire was like a friend, a dangerous, hungry, crackling friend who could warm you, feed you, or absolutely ruin your entire week if you weren't careful. We didn't invent it, of course. Lightning did, or maybe volcanoes. But we tamed it. We brought it to our caves and treated it like royalty. We fed it, protected it, and sometimes talked to it. Yes, talked to it. Because once the fire was burning, and bellies were full, and the night was pushing at the edges of the cave, we started doing something different. We started speaking, or trying to. Historians still debate whether fire was the setting that allowed early language to blossom. But I'd bet all my mammoth jerky it was. Around the fire, no one was hunting, running, or panicking. We were still. We were together. And that's when the real magic happened. It began small. Patterns of sound grunts, evolving into hums, turning into repeated syllables. You know that thing toddlers do when they say the same nonsense word over and over until it feels like it means something. That, except it wasn't nonsense to us. It was the beginning of meaning. I remember one night, someone repeated the sound, buh, while pointing at the fire, over and over. Buh, buh. Eventually the others started saying it too. Maybe it meant fire, or hot, or don't touch you, absolute fool. But from that night on, whenever someone shouted, buh, people paid attention. A word was born, or at least a proto-word, a linguistic embryo, a syllable with ambition. Bizarre fact. Some researchers believe that the earliest words were likely nouns, simple things you could point to, name, repeat. Fire, rock, stick, food. You know the essentials. Not exactly Shakespeare yet, but give us a few millennia. We started naming each other too, not formally. No one said, hey, I hereby declare your name to be Snorg. But we did develop sounds that belonged to certain people. If someone made a particular clicking sound every time they wanted my attention, that became me. Was it accurate? Probably not. But was it helpful? You bet. It also made yelling a lot easier, especially when someone was about to walk into a sleeping saber-toothed tiger. True story. He survived, but not without a dramatic scar and a new nickname, Almost Food. We learned to string things together. One sound wasn't enough, so we added another. Pointing at the sky and saying "ka" wasn't enough. We wanted to say big sky, red sky, danger sky. So ku became ku-ra, or ku-ha, or ku-ta. Was it consistent? Absolutely not. Was it beautiful? Maybe in a messy prehistoric kind of way. There was one guy, I swear he tried to name everything. Rockleaf smoked toe. Every time he saw something new, he'd whisper a sound and repeat it to himself until someone else caught on. Eventually, we just called him Mouth. He didn't mind. He thought it was a compliment. It wasn't. But in fairness, he wasn't wrong, because those words stuck. We started knowing what others were thinking before they threw something at us or grunted in frustration. It was revolutionary. Historians still debate whether this rise in vocal symbols drove social cooperation or vice versa. But I'll say this, once you can warn someone instead of physically dragging them away, teamwork gets a whole lot easier. Around the fire, we also learned rhythm. People started clapping, tapping bones on stone, humming repetitive sounds. Not quite songs, more like language with a beat. One woman used to thump her chest and grunt in a rhythm that told us how many animals she'd seen that day. Was it exact? No, but we got the idea. Thump, grunt, thump, thump meant lots of deer. Bring extra spears. Soon fire time became talk time. We mimicked animal sounds. We mimicked each other. We imitated laughter, tears, thunder, wind. Eventually, someone grunted in a rhythm so funny it made the entire group fall over laughing. That's when we knew language had power. Not just to warn, not just to label, but to connect. And that's when we started playing with it. Someone once tried to describe how far they walked that day using only their arms. It looked like interpretive dance meets mild panic. We laughed so hard we had to add wavy arm man to our growing vocabulary of sounds. Soon, the fire wasn't just warmth. It was a stage, a classroom, a cradle for the earliest words of every language yet to come. And it all started with the fire reflecting in our eyes in the silence between the sparks, where one sound led to another and another, until the dark wasn't so quiet anymore. The hand speaks too. You'd think with all this talk about grunting and syllables, we did everything with our mouths. But let me tell you, our hands were loud too. Before language lived in the throat, it danced in our fingers. Our ancestors talked with their eyes, their eyebrows, the twitch of a shoulder, the way they held a stick just so. Every gesture meant something. Some meant come here, some meant get lost, and some meant do not eat, that it smells like regret. Historians still debate whether gestures preceded vocal language or evolved alongside it. Honestly, I think both happened in a clumsy duet. We pointed and grunted. We tilted our heads and hummed. And somehow, we started understanding one another. There was one gesture we all knew, the flat palm pushing down. It meant quiet. Stop. Danger nearby. It came in handy when someone got too excited trying to explain how they outran a wild boar. They didn't. Another favorite was the finger spin, a little loop in the air. It meant again. It started when someone told the same funny story around the fire. One listener waved his finger and grunted. The storyteller beamed and started over. Yes, even back then we had reruns. We used our whole bodies to speak. When you wanted to say, "I'm tired," you didn't say it. You slumped. Your shoulders dragged your feet and let out a breath like a dying goat. People understood. Maybe because they felt it too. We didn't have grammar, but we had rhythm. We didn't have verbs, but we had movement. One of our elders had a way of lifting her eyebrows while swinging her arms that somehow meant, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. But fine, go ahead." We all feared her with love. And here's your bizarre fact. Even today, deaf communities around the world use signed languages that are as complex, expressive, and grammatical as spoken ones, complete with slang jokes and poetic forms. Language doesn't need a voice. It needs intention. Our gestures got more detailed over time. A single hand wave could mean hello, goodbye, or the fire's too smoky and my eyes are crying, please fix it. But when paired with a grunt or a facial expression or a shuffle of the feet, it became unmistakable. We didn't think of it as communication. We thought of it as survival. When a predator lurked nearby, we couldn't yell. We signaled. Tight fists, eyes wide, frozen stances. Silence was its own kind of language. Mothers gestured to soothe babies, pointed to water, mimed the motion of drinking, patted the ground to say sleep, rocked imaginary bundles to mean be gentle. One baby, chubby cheeks, and a temper used to point and grunt at everything he wanted. If he didn't get it, he'd slam both fists on the ground and shriek. So naturally, we started using his move when we didn't get what we wanted. And thus, tantrum culture was born. We also used hands to exaggerate stories. If someone saw a bear, they didn't just grunt big beast. They became the bear. Hunched shoulders, snarled lips, paws raised, claws pantomimed. Our cave turned into community theater every night. No auditions, no scripts, just raw passion and way too much mimed biting. And gestures weren't limited to humans. We watched animals gesture too. Wolves curled lips, birds bobbed heads, even monkeys threw things, mostly at us. We copied them, sometimes for fun, sometimes for meaning, sometimes just to see who could look the most ridiculous. I lost that contest, by the way. But all of this grunts, gestures, faces, posture, started to form patterns. Those patterns became expectations. Expectations turned into rules, rules that no one wrote down, rules that lived in the shared rhythm of our movement. Don't speak when the elder raises her palm. Don't eat until the hunter does the circle tap gesture. Don't interrupt a story unless you have something better. And trust me, you probably don't. Over time, we built a kind of proto-grammar. We didn't know what grammar was. We couldn't spell if our lives depended on it. They often did, but we knew sound plus gesture equals message. Message plus repetition, a memory. Memory plus sharing equals culture. And once we had culture, we were never going back. Our hands told stories before our mouths could catch up. They painted in the air what words couldn't hold yet. And maybe, just maybe, they still do. Songs of the hunt. There was a rhythm to everything we did. No, really. You think we just ran after mammoths in silence like overgrown squirrels? Absolutely not. We made noise. But not just any noise, purposeful noise. We sang, kind of. Okay. It was more like chanting, humming, repetitive mouth sounds with intention. But I promise you, it felt like singing when we did it together. And trust me, singing while running through a muddy forest with a sharpened stick is an underrated experience. Hunting wasn't just about speed or strength. It was about timing, teamwork, signals. And nothing kept us in sync like shared sound. We discovered early that if we chanted the same phrase, in rhythm, ha, 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 our feet moved better, our hands steadied, our courage grew. Historians still debate whether music evolved before or after structured language. But out there under open skies, with a giant angry animal in front of you, a good beat felt more important than grammar. One day, my cousin started tapping 2 stones together while tracking a herd. He kept the rhythm going faster as the chase picked up. We followed it without thinking. It wasn't a plan. It was instinct, and it worked. So naturally, we started assigning rhythms to different animals. Slow beat, grazing deer. Sharp rhythm, nervous boar. Long pause in the middle, that meant, uh-oh, they saw us. It became a language of rhythm. And rhythm became a tool. Not just to communicate, but to regulate our own minds. That's your historical fact for today. Some anthropologists suggest early humans used rhythmic sounds and proto-songs as a form of mental coordination controlling breathing, reducing fear and syncing movements during complex group tasks like hunting. Cool, right? And bizarre fact, there's a tribe in Papua New Guinea that still uses hunting songs passed down for generations, sung only while stalking specific animals. No other time. That's commitment. We sang during preparation too. Grinding roots, hum low. Sharpening spears, click stones. Braiding cords, whisper names of ancestors over and over. Even children picked it up. One of them made up a tune just to ask for honey. It was ridiculously catchy. We sang it every time we found a beehive. I still hum it when I see bees. Reflex. At some point, we added movement. Dancing maybe, or just moving in rhythm with the chant. Stomping. Hand claps. Shoulder shakes. We didn't call it dance, but it made the blood warm and the air less heavy before we headed out. Before long, those hunting chants carried meaning beyond the chase. We sang when someone was born. We sang when someone died. We sang when the rain wouldn't come, and when it finally did. Even disagreements had rhythm. 2 elders once got into a shouting match, grunting back and forth like dueling drums. It was terrifying and slightly hilarious. No one knew who won, but someone beat a log afterward, and we took that as a closing statement. There was something soothing about it all. The world was unpredictable storms, predators' illness, but rhythm that we could control. We shaped sound into loops, loops into patterns, patterns into memory. We remembered through sound, which was handy because memory was our only storage system. One chant described where the wild garlic grew. Another warned of the slippery rock near the waterfall. Another one we sang in a weird pitch while holding our noses, meant never drink from this pool. Trust us. And yet we also sang for no reason at all, just because it felt good, because it made our bodies feel less alone, because it filled the space between our thoughts. Historians still debate whether music was essential to survival or a delightful accident of evolution. But I say, if it kept us from panicking while being chased by something with tusks, it earned its place in the family tree. The fire chants changed too. What began as humming turned into shared phrases, repeated, reshaped, passed around like warm bread. Some were nonsense, some weren't, and some sat somewhere in the middle, like the phrase my aunt used to chant when she stirred the soup. No one knew what it meant, but it made the soup taste better. Maybe that was the point. Words that didn't just describe. They felt like something. They held emotion, intention. They became tools, not just of information, but of connection. And so the hunt shaped our voice, not just to warn or to label, but to remember, to move to survive. We didn't just use language to chase our prey. We used it to chase each other's hearts, mothers, babies, and broken silence. If you really want to find the roots of language, you don't look in the middle of a hunt. You look at a mother and her baby. That's where the real breakthroughs happened. In whispers, in coos, in nonsense sounds that somehow made perfect sense to both of them. Because let me tell you, when a baby won't stop screaming like a wounded hawk, you'll invent a lot of words to make it stop. I watched my sister hold her newborn. One night, tiny thing wrapped in a strip of rabbit hide, and she made this noise, a soft, clicky purr grunt. No idea what it meant. But the baby stopped crying immediately. And just like that clicky purr grunt became our go-to baby silencer. We weren't calling it language, of course. We didn't call anything, anything. But we felt the shift. Suddenly, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about soothing, reassuring, teaching. Historians still debate whether baby talk was one of the first forms of structured vocalization. But I'll tell you, no one's more motivated to be understood than a tired parent running on half a roasted beet and 3 hours of sleep. And babies learned fast. They watched mouths, listened to tone, recognized repetition. One toddler, every time someone dropped food, would shriek "Bah." We thought it was just a sound until he did it every single time. Then someone else started doing it too. And boom, now everyone said "Bah" whenever something fell. Thanks, kid. You named gravity. And here's a bizarre fact. Modern linguists have found that mama or ma is one of the most common baby words across almost every language on Earth. Why? Because M and A are among the easiest sounds for infants to produce while nursing. It's less about meaning, more about mechanics. But meaning came quickly. We realized we could name body parts, emotions, even people. A mother could warn a child with just a shift in tone, high-pitched no or low-toned uh-uh. It worked. Especially if she paired it with the classic eyebrow of doom. Language became repetition, and repetition became memory. We started using baby talk with each other. Adults whispering silly sounds when scared, calling to one another with nicknames that made no sense to outsiders. That's how intimacy works. You shrink the world down into sounds only your people understand. The fire became a school, not the kind with chalkboards and detentions. Though believe me, if rolling into the fire got you grounded, we'd all be in trouble. but the kind where stories and gestures and sounds were passed down from old to young and back again. A child once asked for something by miming a spear and grunting what sounded like kana. We all laughed, but it stuck. Kana became our word for spear. Why? Because he was cute and insisted on it. Kids have always run the show honestly. We learned that language wasn't just sounds, it was play. We made up words, stretched them, bent them, rhymed them, even sang them wrong on purpose, just to get laughs. Sound became game, and game became lesson. Sometimes we'd repeat a phrase to a baby while pointing at something. Boo! Boo! Then we'd wait. The kid would look around unsure, then point at the same object and say, Buh! Close enough. That's when it hit us. Language was shared imagination. A sound had no power. Unless someone else agreed, it meant something. That required trust, repetition, connection, and sometimes failure. I once tried to teach a toddler the word for rock. I pointed, said Ra, and smiled. She stared at me, then pointed at a stick and said Ra, then a tree, then my foot. It took a week before she understood. Then one day, she picked up a rock, grinned, and shouted, Ra! Like she'd just discovered fire all over again. Proudest moment of my life. We realized the key to language wasn't clarity, it was patience. And you learn that best with babies. We even started using different tones. Soothing ones for comfort, high exaggerated ones for attention, deep slow ones when we were serious. And eventually, these tones meant something. High and fast equal urgent, low and long equals danger, soft and rhythmic equals safe. It was the dawn of emotional language, of tone as a tool. Not just what you said, but how you said it. Historians still debate whether tonal language developed independently in multiple regions or if it was baked into the earliest proto-languages. Either way, once we had it, we never stopped using it. Even animals understood. Dogs, or whatever version of not quite wolves we had back then, would perk up at certain tones. Babies, too. We were all tuned to the music of voice long before we had lyrics, and language didn't stop when the child grew up. It grew with them. A word once meant food. Then it meant my food. Then it meant give it back before I scream. Complexity blossomed like roots in soil. We didn't need to invent new parts. We just rearranged what we had, like stacking pebbles into shapes no one expected. And suddenly, our world wasn't just trees and rocks and fire. It was stories. It was names. It was a lullaby, humming through the dark, promising that someone would always understand you, even when you didn't have the right words yet. When words drew blood. Now, not all language was lullabies and laughter. Once we figured out that words could soothe, we also figured out they could sting. Language, like fire, is a tool. Warm one moment, scorching the next. And once we began assigning meaning to sounds, someone inevitably weaponized them. Because, of course, we did. What good is a new invention if we can't use it to argue about berries? It started with disagreements. Two hunters returned with nothing. One blamed the wind. The other muttered a word, just one word, but the tone said everything. Lazy. Suddenly the group went quiet. All eyes turned. The accused stood chest puffed, fists clenched. The next few minutes were not peaceful. No one died. But someone got shoved into the ash pile. Again. That was when we realized words didn't just describe the world, they could change it. You see, historians still debate whether early humans developed morality or manipulation first. Personally, I think those two held hands from the beginning and skipped through history together, spreading chaos and gossip. Once we had words, we could shift blame, twist truth, elevate one person, diminish another. No spear required, just syllables. Even elders weren't immune. One elder, we'll call her Thorn Eyes, was feared for her wisdom. Until one day, A younger member whispered that she had forgotten the names of the stars. No one verified it, but it spread quietly, like wildfire without the light. That rumor dethroned her faster than any injury ever could. Now that's power. And a bizarre fact for you. In some indigenous cultures, words are believed to have such spiritual power that speaking someone's name without permission is considered dangerous or even deadly. Early humans may have held similar taboos, speech as sacred, and also slightly terrifying. We created names, then we used them to summon or shame. We created insults, then carved them into others like verbal spears. Even compliments had hidden blades. Strong could mean brave or reckless. Quiet could mean thoughtful or coward. Language grew sharp edges, and with sharpness came rules. We began to regulate who could say what and when. Children could not interrupt elders. Hunters could not claim more than their share of praise. Certain words were forbidden during meals. Others were reserved only for firelight. And the most sacred of all words we didn't even say aloud. Words for the dead, words for the gods, words for the things we feared so deeply that naming them might make them real. Sometimes silence spoke louder. A child once asked why no one talked about a certain place beyond the ridge. The elders looked away. Someone touched the fire with a stick, muttered a single syllable, and the discussion ended. We never went there again. Yeah, language got spooky fast. It also got clever. We invented metaphors before we knew what a metaphor was. One hunter said, "His mouth is like the river, fast and full of noise." It was meant as a joke, but it stuck. And just like that, river mouth became the group nickname for the loudest among us. Poor guy. Still hasn't stopped talking. We started shaping stories to protect or persuade. Don't go into the forest, or the night beast will find you. Share your meat, or your dreams will turn against you. Were they true? Not exactly. Did they work? Every time. Because when words hit you in the fear center of the brain, logic takes a nap. We also discovered secrets. Not everything needed to be shared. One day, two foragers returned early, their baskets empty, but their smiles suspiciously smug. Later that week, they whispered something to each other in a pattern no one else understood. Turns out they'd found a hidden grove of sweet roots and decided not to tell the rest of us. We were outraged, not about the roots, about the secret language. They had invented inside jokes. The betrayal stung. Language was no longer a public tool. It could be hoarded, hidden, customized. Historians still debate whether early dialects and secret codes arose from survival or selfishness. Me? I think it's both. Sometimes survival is selfishness wearing better shoes. We started watching our words, measuring tone, reading faces. A look could now mean, "Don't say that." A pause could mean they're listening. Language taught us not only to speak, but to listen better, to analyze, to protect. Because one wrong word, that could start a fire nobody knew how to put out. I once called someone's idea soft. I meant gentle. He heard weak. We didn't speak for a season. Eventually, I offered him the choicest piece of roast and mumbled, "Maybe soft is strong." He nodded. We let it go. Kindness. It turns out also has a vocabulary. We were learning that too. But first, we had to survive the phase where words drew blood. Whispers in the cave. You know where language really exploded? Caves. No, seriously. I'm not just saying that because they had excellent acoustics, though they did. Nothing like hearing your own grunt echo back at you like nature's sarcastic reply. It was inside the cool, dark silence of the cave that our voices found new meaning. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were remembering. You see, fire gave us heat. Language gave us warnings. But caves gave us echoes. And those echoes made us start thinking. Maybe words didn't end when we said them. Maybe they lingered. One night, someone probably bored started making sounds just to hear them bounce back. He'd grunt, wait, grin, and repeat it louder. The rest of us thought he'd finally lost it. But after a while, we started joining in. And before long, the whole group was chanting one phrase over and over into the cave, watching it boomerang back at us like a ghostly version of ourselves. It was terrifying and awesome. Historians still debate whether caves were sacred sites because of their acoustics or their protection. But once we discovered the cave's voice, we never looked at it the same way again. We started bringing stories inside and telling them not just what happened today, but what happened before. We'd gather in circles, the fire flickering against damp walls, and someone would step forward, usually the loudest, most theatrical among us, the one who never hunted but always knew a guy, and he'd perform. Once before the sun knew our names. That's how they often began. And we'd listen, not for facts, for feeling. We started using language to fill the silence to explain things we couldn't see, touch, or prove. That's how myths were born. And honestly, some of them were wildly creative. A snake that ate the stars. A bird that could steal memories. A mountain that grew teeth every spring. Were they true? Absolutely not. Were they better than anything on Netflix? Definitely. And weirdly enough, they worked. Because myths explained things we didn't understand. And when you have no science, no medicine, and no idea why the moon disappears every month, a story with a talking wolf makes as much sense as anything else. Here's your bizarre fact. Some of the earliest cave art in Europe is more than 40,000 years old, and researchers believe certain symbols repeat in specific patterns, hinting at early proto-writing systems. That's right, language wasn't just heard, it was drawn. We started combining sound and sight, symbols scratched into stone, marks on bark, patterns in ash. A circle might mean the sun, a zigzag might mean danger, a spiral, who knows, but it looked cool, and sometimes that was enough. We didn't call it writing, but it was the first time language tried to stay somewhere after we left. It was proof that we were here, and that we had something to say, even if we were just drawing a really aggressive deer. I once drew a picture of myself with a fish bigger than my body. It was a complete lie, but people believed it, and I was invited to every fishing trip after that. So, no regrets. We started using the cave walls like a group chat. One symbol meant food here, another meant stay away. Someone added a crude sketch of two figures fighting possibly the world's first meme. Language was no longer limited to the mouth. It had hands, chalk, ash, bone tools dipped in ochre, and more than that, it had intention. Not just say what I see, but say what I remember, what I fear, what I dream. Because let's be honest, dreams needed explaining. One elder swore she floated above the trees at night, guided by glowing foxes. Another claimed to speak to shadows, who answered in riddles. And the more they told these stories, the more others nodded, chimed in, added their own versions. That's how belief was born. Not through proof, through repetition, through language. It wasn't just for asking where the water was. It was for wonder. And that was when we crossed the threshold, when our words weren't just tools, but mirrors. Not just instructions, but songs. Not just warnings, but whispers from the deep. In the cave, our language stopped being practical. It became poetic, because some things like grief, or awe, or the way the stars feel too big when you lie on your back can't be explained in gestures or grunts. They can only be told. So we did, and our voices filled the dark with more than sound. They filled it with meaning. The day we named the sky, there was a moment clear as flint striking stone when we realized something shocking. We could name things we couldn't touch. Until then, words mostly stuck to the tangible. Rock, fire, spear, belly. If you could poke it, lift it, or yell at it, it got a name. Simple. But one evening, as the fire crackled and we passed around roasted roots like they were gourmet delicacies, a small child looked up at the stars and whispered a new sound. Anna. Nobody knew what it meant, but we all followed her gaze, and just like that, Anu became sky. And I mean that literally. For weeks, anytime someone looked up, we said it. No. It felt like the sky was listening. And honestly, it probably was, because right after we started using the word, it rained for 3 straight days. Coincidence? Historians still debate whether abstract nouns like sky love or death developed later in linguistic evolution, or whether they emerged alongside basic words and just took longer to stabilize. But for us, naming the sky was the beginning of everything intangible having a shape in our minds. We gave names to things that couldn't be held. Time. That became drawn a word we used for long walks that ended with sore legs and a changed heart. Fear. We called that show a breathy sound you made when something made the hair on your neck stand up. Dreams. That one was tricky. We tried a dozen different sounds until someone settled on a slow humming phrase that meant both sleep and maybe real, maybe not. We were building an invisible world with invisible words, and not everyone liked it. There were skeptics, of course, gruff types who only trusted what they could hit with a stick. One hunter laughed every time we named something he couldn't throw, until he fell off a ledge and shouted "shuh" as he tumbled. So yeah, that settled it. Even the disbelievers eventually adopted the vocabulary because it worked. You couldn't hold hope in your hand, but you felt it when someone whispered it after a long hunt gone wrong. You couldn't weigh loss, but when someone said it aloud, paired with a soft gesture and a bowed head, it suddenly became lighter to carry. Here's your bizarre fact. In some ancient languages, the word for soul literally translates to breath or wind. Because when someone died, what left their body was invisible yet unmistakable. We might not have called it a soul, but we knew something had flown away. We named the wind. We named the moon's shadow. We named the feeling when two people lock eyes across a fire and suddenly everyone else disappears. That one changed depending on how it turned out. And we started telling stories, not just of what happened, but of what could. A child once said, "What if the stars fall?" And everyone went quiet. Someone else said, "Then we'll catch them in our spears." It was a silly exchange, but it stayed with us. So much so, we created a word Narla. It meant maybe not real, but definitely possible. And that, my friend, is how imagination became a shared territory. Language wasn't just about expressing the now. It was about dreaming out loud. We started painting with our voices, using tone to shape doubt, using silence to imply depth, using repetition to stir belief. Someone told a story of a beast with 100 legs that lived under the earth and made the ground shake when it laughed. Another person asked if it was real. The storyteller shrugged and said Narla, and we nodded, because that was enough. We even began using metaphors for ourselves. One brave girl called her anger stone belly. When asked why, she said, "Because it sits there and weighs me down." A mother described her child's smile as sun hands. A man who lost his brother said, "My shadow feels longer now." We didn't have poetry classes, but somehow we were all poets, even without rules, even without writing, just sounds and stories, and the courage to speak about what couldn't be seen. We named the sky. Then we named everything we felt underneath it. And in doing so, we discovered that the truest parts of being human are the ones you can't touch, only tell. Echoes become maps. It started when we got lost. I mean, really, really lost. We'd wandered too far from the main river during a hunt, chasing a deer that clearly had no intention of being dinner. Trees blurred together. The sun dipped low, and someone whispered, "Where are we?" That's when one of the younger foragers said something odd. "We passed the sharp tree 3 songs ago." What? 3 songs, she repeated. I sang the bee hum song, then the fire chant, and then the root finding song. We all stared at her amazed. She hadn't been tracking distance. She'd been tracking experience. And that's when it clicked. Our songs and stories weren't just entertainment. They were maps, not made of lines or symbols, but of rhythm and memory, of phrases that stuck to places like moss sticks to stone. Historians still debate whether language shaped geography or vice versa. But if you ask me, our words were the landscape. And the moment we named a place, it became easier to find. We called the ravine with the echo voice stone. We called the clearing where rabbits danced skip belly. We gave names to rocks, paths, even shadows that reappeared every season. Language let us remember direction, not as turn left at the bush, but as walk until the sun touches your back and the bird sings sideways. Okay, maybe not that poetic, but close. We encoded roots in chants. One path had a rhythm that sounded like a heartbeat. Another had a melody that sped up just before the cliff bend. You didn't memorize the way you sang it. And yes, that means we occasionally argued over tempo. No, you're rushing the second hill. You skipped the part where we passed Snake Rock. You haven't lived until you've seen grown adults argue over interpretive hiking. Here's your bizarre fact. In some Aboriginal Australian cultures, songlines are oral maps, songs that describe the landscape in sequence, so you can literally sing your way across the desert. Our ancestors may have had something similar. It made perfect sense. Language was becoming our external memory. We didn't just use it to share stories. We used it to offload information. Why clutter your brain when you could teach a song to someone else and have them carry it? Suddenly, knowledge was no longer trapped in one head. It lived between us. One elder carried the chant of the Southern Trail. A child memorized the names of safe mushrooms. A hunter knew the warning phrase for the night when wolves came too close. We each held a piece of the world, and when we gathered, when we spoke, we put the puzzle back together. And this was the birth of teaching, not by accident, by design. We sat the young ones down and repeated phrases until they stuck. We used rhythm humor, sometimes even embarrassment. One poor boy tried to skip a line in the food chant and ended up asking for tree bark soup. The joke lasted 3 seasons, but he never forgot the line again. Repetition became ritual. Ritual became memory. Memory became safety. Language wasn't just for now. It was for later, and it gave us something no other creature had mastered: the ability to plan ahead. We could say, tomorrow we go to Water Ear, and everyone knew where and why. We could warn 2 nights from now the cold comes. We could promise, when the moon is full, we gather. We even started using words for numbers, simple ones. 1, 2, and many. That was enough for most things. Many usually meant too many to fight. Let's just run. Eventually, someone got clever and added 3, then 4. Numbers were born not in accounting, but in sharing. And the more we shared, the stronger we became. Because when you can share a route, you don't get lost alone. When you can share a warning, you don't die the same way twice. When you can share dreams, you build the kind of future no one could make alone. Language taught us to trust memory beyond our own, to let someone else hold the story for a while, and to believe they'd give it back, maybe changed, maybe embellished, but still alive. We were mapping the world, not with stone or ink, but with sound. And once that started, there was no stopping it. The first word for us. There's one word I remember more than any other. We don't know who said it first. Probably someone ancient and tired, sitting at a fire after a long walk, sharing berries with people who didn't share their blood, but somehow felt like family anyway. The word Ina, it meant us, not just me and you, but all of us, the hunters, the gatherers, the loudmouth storytellers, and the silent fire watchers, even the annoying guy who snored like thunder and insisted on explaining every joke. Us. And the moment we had a word for us, something shifted. We were no longer just individuals cooperating for food. We were a group, a tribe, a people. Historians still debate whether identity formed from language or the other way around. But I'm telling you, Nothing changes your brain like being able to say we instead of just me. Because suddenly we could plan. We go there. We stay here. We survive. We could feel proud together. We could mourn together. And yes, we could make mistakes and still forgive because we had a word for us. Even when we fought, even when we disagreed, we came back to the circle, to the fire, and whispered Ina again. It became our anchor. It meant I belong, and so do you. That was the real magic of language. Not the naming, not the storytelling, not even the singing, or the jokes, though, let's be real. Some of those were legendary. It was the connection. Language didn't just help us survive, it helped us love. It helped us heal. It helped us hope. It allowed us to reach across the gap between two minds and say, I see you. And you know what's wild? We're still doing it right now. As I whisper these words across time and space into your ears and your mind, we are still doing what we did back then, sitting by the fire, sharing sounds, making meaning together. So the next time you say something simple, thank you, good night, I'm here. Know this, you're part of a chain that stretches back tens of thousands of years. Every syllable is an echo. Every word is a spark. And Ina, that's still the most powerful word I know, because it means we're still here. And now we exhale. Let it settle, the flicker of firelight, the warmth of shared breath, the feeling that somehow, through all the noise and chaos and forgotten beginnings, we've always found a way to say something that matters. Language didn't arrive all at once. It grew slow and stubborn, like moss on stone. From grunts to chants, from whispers to war cries, from lullabies to legends carved in cave walls. It rose from laughter and pain, from falling into rivers and chasing deer through rain, from parents humming to children, from strangers learning to say, we. And even now, when we text, tweet, or whisper bedtime stories, we're still just lighting those same ancient sparks. We don't know the first word ever spoken. Maybe it was joy. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was just a sound that meant I am here and I see you. But whatever it was, it echoed. It traveled through generations, picking up rhythm, structure, poetry, truth, and lies. It split us, and it saved us, and now it brings us here. You, me, this shared moment, a circle, a silence, a story. So thank you for listening, for lending your ears to these wandering thoughts, for letting ancient voices speak again through mine and through yours. Take a breath, say something kind, and remember every word you speak adds a thread to the great tapestry of us. Whisper it now if you like. Ina,